This is HOA outplayed. She waved a scanner like it was a badge. I was standing in my driveway when the tow truck pulled up, and Janet Wilson stepped out of her sedan with a clipboard and a smile that could cut glass. "You are not allowed to rewrite the rules," she said, her voice loud enough to carry across 3 driveways. She pointed at my car and told the driver to hook it. I looked at the wheel lift arm already swinging into position, then back at her. I asked what rule I had broken. She said I still owed a prior tow fee from 2 months ago and she was stacking the new one on top. I told her I had never been towed before. She smiled wider and said that was not what the ledger showed. "I work as a notary public in Tacoma, and I keep everything documented." I knew she was lying. The Eagle Ridge Property Owners Association had been targeting me since I moved in 6 months earlier, and this was the boldest move yet. I asked to see the ledger. She tapped her clipboard and said it was confidential board business. The tow driver was already positioning the lift under my rear tire. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Janet told me recording was harassment and a violation of community conduct policies. I kept the camera rolling. She stepped closer and said I had 30 seconds to move my phone or she would add another violation for obstruction. I asked what the original tow fee was for. She said guest parking after hours without a valid decal. I told her I lived here alone and I had never parked in guest spaces. She said the records did not lie. I asked to see the records. She said I could file a dispute with the management company and wait 4 to 6 weeks. The tow driver clicked the lift into place. I heard metal scrape against asphalt. I told Janet I was not paying for a tow I never received. She said that was not how the association worked, and if I wanted to argue I could do it at the next board meeting in 3 weeks. The truck started lifting my rear wheels off the ground. I asked the driver to stop. He looked at Janet. She nodded and said continue. I said I would call the police. Janet laughed and said the police did not care about civil HOA disputes. She pulled a laminated card from her pocket and waved it at me. She said the Eagle Ridge Board had full authority to enforce parking and towing under the covenants I signed when I bought the property. I told her I had read the covenants and there was no provision for stacking phantom fees. She said the board had discretion to interpret the rules as needed. The tow driver climbed back into the cab. I stepped in front of the truck. Janet screamed that I was obstructing a lawful tow and she would have me cited for interference. I stepped aside because I did not want to get run over. The truck started rolling forward with my car suspended at an angle. I asked where they were taking it. Janet said the impound lot off Pacific Avenue and I could pick it up after I paid both fees, plus the new tow charge and a storage fee that started accruing immediately. I asked how much. She said $940 total. I felt my chest tighten. I was supporting family back home and I could not afford surprise fees or a tow bill. I told her I would fight this. She said good luck with that and turned back toward her sedan. She called over her shoulder that I had 72 hours before the fees doubled. I stood there watching my car disappear down the street. A landscaping contractor was trimming hedges 2 houses down, pretending not to listen, but I saw him glance over every few seconds. I waved at him. He turned back to his trimmer. I pulled out my phone again and called my friend Marcus, a paralegal who helps me organize evidence packets for my notary work. I told him what just happened. He said it sounded like selective enforcement and possibly fraud. I asked what I should do. He said document everything, get copies of all communications, and file a formal records request with the management company immediately. I hung up and walked inside. The Eagle Ridge Property Owners Association was the kind of place where certain homes got special treatment, and everyone knew it. Janet Wilson lived 3 streets over in one of the larger houses near the clubhouse. She had been HOA vice president for 4 years, and she treated the covenants like her personal kingdom. I had heard stories from other neighbors about selective fines, sudden rule changes, and towing threats, but I had kept my head down and followed every rule I could find. I parked in my assigned spot. I kept my trash cans behind the fence. I did not hang anything visible from my balcony. I thought that would be enough. It was not. 2 months earlier, Janet had left a notice on my door claiming I had parked in a guest space overnight. I checked my records and my car had been in my assigned spot all week. I emailed the management company with photos. They said they would look into it. A week later, I got another notice saying the violation stood and I owed a $50 fine. I filed a dispute. The management company lost my dispute packet. I sent it again. They said they never received it. I sent it a third time with delivery confirmation. They said it was under review. That was 6 weeks ago. Now Janet was claiming I owed a tow fee for that same phantom violation, and she was tacking on a second tow for today. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I drafted a formal records request asking for copies of all towing authorizations, parking violation notices, board meeting minutes, and the ledger entries showing the alleged fees. I cited the Washington State Homeowners Association Act and requested a response within 10 business days. I printed 3 copies, signed them, and dropped one in the management company mailbox at the clubhouse. I mailed the second copy certified. I kept the third for my files. I kept my voice low because my trump card needed perfect timing. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real HOA nightmare stories. I did not tell Marcus what my trump card was yet. I wanted to be sure. 3 weeks earlier, my neighbor 2 doors down, an older guy named Phil who worked nights like me, had installed a new doorbell camera. He had mentioned it in passing one morning when we were both getting home at the same time. He said he was sick of package thieves. I had not thought much about it until today. If Janet had been sneaking around my property at night to plant fake violations, Phil's camera might have caught it. I needed to see that footage before I played my hand. I walked over to Phil's place and knocked. He opened the door holding a coffee mug and squinting in the afternoon sun. I explained what happened. He shook his head and said Janet had tried to fine him twice last year for letting his lawn get too long during a drought. I asked if his camera might have caught anyone near my driveway at night. He said it covered his porch and part of the street, and it saved motion clips for 30 days. He invited me in and pulled up the app on his phone. We scrolled back through 2 months of clips. Most of it was delivery drivers, cats, and the occasional raccoon. Then we found it. The timestamp was 2 in the morning on the night Janet claimed I had parked in a guest space. The clip showed her walking up the sidewalk, stopping near my driveway, and taking a photo with her phone. She was holding a clipboard. She looked directly at my car in my assigned spot, then walked to the guest parking area 50 feet away and took another photo. She walked back to her sedan and drove off. The whole thing took 90 seconds. Phil whistled and said that was pretty clear. I asked if he could send me the clip. He said absolutely and airdropped it to my phone. I thanked him and told him I owed him a beer. He said just take Janet down a notch and we would call it even. I walked back to my place and emailed the video to Marcus. He called me 10 minutes later and said it was gold. He said it proved trespassing, intent to fabricate a violation, and bad faith enforcement. I asked if it was enough to reverse the fees. He said it was enough to file a formal complaint with the board and demand a hearing. He said if the board refused, I could escalate to a state complaint or small claims. I told him Janet had also ordered a second tow today and my car was sitting in an impound lot racking up fees. He said that was retaliation and possibly fraud if she forged a tow authorization. I asked what he meant. He said tow companies require written authorization from an HOA officer with a signature. I should get a copy of that authorization and check the handwriting. I called the tow company. A board dispatcher answered, and I explained I was the owner of the vehicle they towed an hour ago. She asked for my plate number. I gave it to her. She said the fee was $280 plus $30 per day storage. I asked for a copy of the tow authorization. She said I could pick it up when I came to get the car. I said I needed it now to dispute the tow. She sighed and said she would email it. I gave her my address. 10 minutes later, I had a PDF of a handwritten tow authorization form with Janet's name printed at the top and a signature at the bottom. The signature did not match the one on the notices she had left on my door. I pulled out the old notices from my file cabinet and compared them. The loops were different. The slant was wrong. Someone else had signed Janet's name. I printed the authorization and the old notices and put them side by side. Marcus called again and I told him what I found. He said that was forgery and it opened the door to criminal charges if I wanted to go that route. I said I wanted to settle this without involving the police if possible, but I needed leverage. He said the video plus the forged signature was enough to force the board to back down. He said I should prepare a packet with all the evidence and present it at the next board meeting. I told him the meeting was 3 weeks away and I could not afford to leave my car in impound that long. He said file an emergency records complaint with the management company and demand an immediate hearing. If they refused, threatened to contact the state attorney general's office and the local news. I drafted an email to the management company and attached the doorbell video, the forged authorization, and the side-by-side signature comparison. I stated that I was a victim of fraudulent towing and selective enforcement, and I demanded an emergency hearing within 48 hours, or I would escalate to state regulators and media. I copied the entire HOA board, including Janet. I hit send at 4:30 in the afternoon. By 5:15 my phone was ringing. It was the property manager, a tired-sounding woman named Linda who always acted like everything was too much trouble. She said I was causing problems and making serious accusations. I said I had proof. She said the board would not meet on short notice. I said then I would file a state complaint tomorrow morning. She said she would see what she could do and hung up. At 6 o'clock I got an email from Linda saying the board would hold a special hearing tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. I replied confirming I would be there. I called Marcus and told him. He said he would come as a witness and bring his portable scanner in case we needed to make copies on the spot. I thanked him and spent the rest of the evening organizing my evidence into a 3-ring binder with tabs. I included the doorbell video on a thumb drive, printed stills from the video, the forged tow authorization, the signature comparison, copies of all notices Janet had left, my dispute emails, and the delivery confirmations showing the management company had received my packets. I also printed the section of the Washington HOA Act covering records access and dispute resolution. I went to bed at midnight and barely slept. The next day dragged. I spent the morning calling the tow company again to confirm my car was still there and negotiate a payment plan if this did not go my way. The dispatcher said I could pay half now and half in 2 weeks, but the storage fees kept running. I said I would let her know by tomorrow. I hung up and checked my bank account. I had $800 available. If I paid the tow fees, I would not make rent. I felt my stomach twist. I had to win this hearing. At 6:30 I drove my rental car to the clubhouse. Marcus met me in the parking lot. He was carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing a button-down shirt like he was going to court. He said he had printed extra copies of everything just in case. We walked inside together. The clubhouse meeting room was a bland space with folding tables arranged in a U-shape and a projector screen on one wall. Janet was already there, sitting at the center of the head table with her small handheld stamp in front of her and a stack of binders beside her. The HOA president, a retired engineer named Dale, sat to her right. The treasurer, a woman named Karen, her name was Brenda, sat to her left. Linda, the property manager, sat at the far end looking like she would rather be anywhere else. Dale called the meeting to order and said we were here to address my complaint regarding a tow authorization and alleged selective enforcement. He asked me to present my case. I walked to the front and set my binder on the table. I said I was here because Janet Wilson had ordered 2 fraudulent tows on my vehicle and was attempting to collect nearly $1,000 in fabricated fees. Janet interrupted and said that was slander. Dale told her to wait her turn. I opened the binder and pulled out the doorbell video stills. I said 2 months ago Janet claimed I parked in a guest space overnight and issued a $50 fine. I said I disputed the fine because my car was in my assigned spot all night. I said the management company lost my dispute twice and then ignored it. I clicked the thumb drive into my laptop and projected the doorbell video onto the screen. The room went silent as everyone watched Janet walk up to my driveway at 2 in the morning, photograph my car in its correct spot, then walk to the guest area and photograph that too before leaving. I paused the video and said this proved Janet had fabricated the violation and trespassed on association property to do it. Janet stood up and said the video was edited and inadmissible. I said it had a timestamp and metadata and I could provide the raw file. Dale asked Janet if she had been on the property that night. She said she was conducting routine compliance checks. I asked why she was conducting checks at 2 in the morning without notifying anyone. She said the board had discretion to inspect at any time. Brenda, the treasurer, frowned and said she had never approved nighttime inspections. I moved to the next tab in my binder and pulled out the tow authorization from yesterday. I said Janet had also ordered a second tow on my vehicle yesterday afternoon without any prior notice or hearing. I said the tow company provided this authorization form with her name on it. I pulled out the old violation notices and laid them beside the authorization. I said the signatures did not match. I pointed at the differences in the loops and slant. I said someone had forged Janet's signature on the tow form. Janet said that was absurd. I said the evidence was right here. Dale leaned forward and compared the signatures himself. He looked at Janet and asked if she had signed the tow authorization. She said she had authorized the tow verbally, and someone else must have filled out the paperwork. I said that was not how tow authorizations worked, and the tow company required a written signature from an HOA officer. Brenda asked who else had access to HOA letterhead and authorization forms. Linda, the property manager, said only board members and management staff. Dale asked Linda if she had signed anything yesterday. Linda said no. Dale looked at Janet and asked again if she had signed the form. Janet said she did not remember. I said the video and the forged signature together proved a pattern of bad faith enforcement and fraud. I said I was demanding a full refund of all fees, an apology, and a policy change to prevent selective enforcement going forward. Janet slammed her small handheld stamp on the table and said, "You think this is petty. I think this is my purpose." The room went quiet. Dale asked Janet to clarify what she meant. She said she had spent 4 years protecting property values and enforcing standards while people like me tried to skate by on technicalities. She said the rules existed for a reason, and if I did not like them, I could sell my house and leave. I said I was not trying to skate by. I was following every rule, and she was inventing violations to harass me. She said I was paranoid. I said I had video evidence of her trespassing and forging documents. She said the video was taken out of context. I asked what context justified trespassing at 2 in the morning to photograph a car that was legally parked. She did not answer. Brenda asked me what I was asking the board to do. I said I wanted the fabricated fees removed from my account, my car released from impound at no cost to me, and a formal apology from Janet for trespassing and filing false reports. I also said I wanted the board to adopt a new policy requiring 2 officer signatures and photographic evidence before any tow could be ordered. Dale asked Linda if that was feasible. Linda said it would slow down enforcement, but it was doable. Janet said it would make enforcement impossible and open the door to violations going unchecked. I said it would make enforcement fair and prevent retaliation. Brenda said she agreed with me. Dale said he would need to review the evidence and consult the association attorney before making a decision. I said I needed an answer tonight because my car was racking up storage fees and I could not afford to wait. Dale said he understood, but the board could not make policy changes without proper notice and a vote. I said the board could vote to refund my fees and release my car immediately as a temporary measure. Janet said that would set a bad precedent. I said the bad precedent was allowing board members to forge documents and fabricate violations. Dale called for a 5-minute recess. Janet stood up and walked out of the room. Brenda leaned over and whispered to Dale. Linda stared at her phone. Marcus nudged me and said it was going well. I said I hoped so. When the recess ended, Dale said the board had decided to refund the $50 fine from 2 months ago and authorize the immediate release of my vehicle from impound at no cost to me. He said the board would also open an internal investigation into the tow authorization signature and the nighttime compliance check. He said the board would review a new tow authorization policy at the next regular meeting. I asked about an apology. Dale said he would address that privately with Janet. I said I wanted it on the record. Janet walked back into the room and sat down. Dale told her the board was refunding my fees and releasing my car. She said that was a mistake. Dale said it was decided. She said she would file a minority report. Dale said that was her right. I thanked the board and left the meeting with Marcus. We walked out to the parking lot and he said I had just won a huge victory. I said it did not feel huge because Janet was still on the board and still had the same authority. He said the investigation would probably force her to step back. I said I hoped so. I called the tow company and told them the HOA had authorized the release. The dispatcher said I still needed to pay the storage fees for the 1 day. I said the HOA was supposed to cover it. She said she had not received that authorization. I called Linda and she said she would send it first thing in the morning. I said I needed it tonight. She said the office was closed. I said I would pick up my car in the morning, and if there were any fees I would send the bill to the HOA. She said fine. I went home and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed with a text from Phil asking how it went. I sent him a thumbs up and said I owed him more than a beer. He replied saying he was just glad someone finally called Janet out. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, but my chest still felt tight. I kept thinking about Janet's face when Dale overruled her. She had looked furious and humiliated, but also defiant. like she was already planning her next move. I knew this was not over. The next morning I drove the rental car to the impound lot off Pacific Avenue and picked up my vehicle. The tow yard guy handed me my keys and said there was no charge. I asked if he had received the HOA authorization. He said yeah, it came through an hour ago. I thanked him and drove home. My car had a deep scratch on the rear bumper from the wheel lift. I took photos and added them to my evidence file. I emailed Linda and said the scratch was caused by the tow and I expected the HOA to cover the repair. She said she would add it to the list of items under review. I did not hold my breath. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from the Eagle Ridge Board. It was a formal notice saying the HOA was implementing an amenities lockout on my account pending resolution of outstanding compliance issues. The letter said I was prohibited from using the clubhouse, pool, gym, or guest parking until further notice. It was signed by Janet. I read the letter 3 times and felt my blood pressure spike. I had just won a hearing and gotten my fees refunded, and now she was retaliating with a lockout. I called Marcus. He said it was illegal retaliation and I should file a state complaint immediately. I said I wanted to handle it internally first. He said I was being too nice. I said I was being strategic. I emailed the entire board and copied Linda. I said the amenities lockout was retaliatory and violated the dispute resolution procedures we had just completed. I said I had no outstanding compliance issues and the lockout was baseless. I demanded it be lifted immediately, or I would file a formal complaint with the Washington State Attorney General and pursue damages for harassment. Janet replied within 10 minutes. She said the lockout was based on a separate violation for failure to display a current parking decal. I looked at my windshield. My decal was right there in the corner, valid through the end of the year. I took a photo and replied with the image attached. I said the decal was clearly displayed and her claim was false. She replied saying the decal was not positioned correctly per the guidelines. I asked what guidelines. She said Section 12 of the parking addendum. I pulled up the covenants and found Section 12. It said decals must be affixed to the lower driver side corner of the windshield. Mine was in the lower passenger side corner. I stared at my screen. She was threatening an amenities lockout because my decal was on the wrong side of the windshield by 12 inches. I replied and said I would move the decal today and expected the lockout to be lifted immediately. She said the lockout would remain in place until the board reviewed my compliance history at the next meeting. I said that was retaliation. She said it was standard procedure. I forwarded the entire email chain to Marcus and asked if I had grounds for a restraining order. He said possibly, but it would be faster to escalate the state complaint and let the Attorney General's office put pressure on the board. I said I would think about it. That afternoon, I moved my parking decal to the driver's side corner. I took a photo and emailed it to Linda with Janet copied. I said the decal was now positioned per the guidelines and I expected the lockout to be lifted. Linda replied saying she would forward my request to the board. Janet did not reply. I went to the gym that evening to test whether the lockout was still active. The card reader beeped red and denied my access. I took a video of the denial and emailed it to the board. I said the lockout was still in place despite my compliance, and I was documenting every instance of retaliation for my state complaint. Brenda replied and said she would bring it up at the next board meeting. I said the next meeting was 2 weeks away and I was paying HOA dues for amenities I could not use. She said she understood my frustration, but the board could not act without a quorum. The next day I got another notice. This one was taped to my front door. It was a guest pass violation claiming I had an unauthorized vehicle parked in my driveway overnight. I looked at my driveway. My car was there. The notice had a photo attached showing my car with the license plate visible. I checked the date on the photo. It was from last night. I checked my registration. The plate matched. I called Linda and asked how my own car could be an unauthorized vehicle. She said the system flagged it as a guest vehicle because the plate was not on file. I said I had registered my plate when I moved in. She said she would check the database. She called me back 20 minutes later and said my plate was on file, but it had been marked inactive 2 weeks ago. I asked who marked it inactive. She said she did not know. I asked her to reactivate it. She said she would, but it could take up to 5 business days to process. I said that was ridiculous. She said it was the system. I hung up and called Marcus. I told him what happened. He said Janet was systematically creating violations to justify enforcement actions. He said it was harassment and I needed to document every single one. I said I was documenting everything, but it felt like I was playing whack-a-mole. He said the pattern was the evidence. He said if I could show the board was targeting me with frivolous violations while ignoring identical issues at other properties, I could prove selective enforcement and possibly win damages. I asked how I could prove that. He said drive around the neighborhood and take photos of other homes with identical issues. I said that sounded like a lot of work. He said it was worth it. I spent the next 2 hours driving around Eagle Ridge taking photos. I found 6 homes with decals on the passenger side. I found 4 homes with guests parked in driveways overnight. I found 3 homes with trash cans visible from the street. I found 2 homes with lawn violations worse than anything I had ever been cited for. I compiled the photos into a spreadsheet with addresses and violation types. I sent the spreadsheet to Marcus and asked if it was enough. He said it was a start. He said I should also request copies of all violation notices issued in the past year and compare them to my list. I said the management company would probably stonewall me. He said then I would add that to my state complaint. I filed another records request asking for all parking and compliance violations issued in the past 12 months, broken down by address. Linda replied saying that information was confidential and could not be released without board approval. I replied citing the Washington HOA Act section on records access and said violation records were not confidential and I had a legal right to inspect them. She said she would consult the association attorney. I said I expected a response within 10 business days per statute. She did not reply. 2 weeks later, the regular board meeting arrived. I showed up with Marcus and my updated evidence binder. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. Word had gotten around about my dispute and several neighbors had shown up to watch. Phil was there. The landscaping contractor was there. A woman I had never met was there with a notebook. Janet sat at the head table looking calm and composed. Dale called the meeting to order and started with routine business. Budget approvals, landscaping contract renewals, pool maintenance. I waited through 20 minutes of tedious updates. Finally, Dale said the board would now address my ongoing dispute and the proposed tow authorization policy. Dale summarized the previous hearing and said the board had refunded my fees and released my car as a temporary resolution. He said the board had also opened an investigation into the tow authorization signature. He said the investigation was ongoing and he could not share details yet. He said the board had also reviewed my request to lift the amenities lockout. Janet interrupted and said the lockout was still in place because I had additional outstanding violations including improper decal placement, an unauthorized guest vehicle, and trash can visibility. I stood up and said all 3 violations had been resolved or were fabricated. I pulled out my spreadsheet and walked to the front. I said I had documented 6 other homes with decals on the passenger side and none of them had been cited. I said I had also documented 4 homes with guests parked overnight and 3 homes with visible trash cans. I said the selective enforcement was obvious. Janet said those other homes were not my concern. I said they were absolutely my concern because they proved the board was targeting me while ignoring identical violations elsewhere. Dale asked to see the spreadsheet. I handed it to him. He flipped through it and frowned. Brenda leaned over and looked at it too. She said it was a fair point. Janet said the board could not enforce every violation simultaneously and prioritization was part of the job. I said prioritization was fine, but targeting one homeowner with frivolous violations while ignoring worse violations elsewhere was harassment. The woman with the notebook started writing faster. Dale said he appreciated my documentation and the board would take it into consideration. He said the amenities lockout would be lifted immediately pending resolution of the underlying investigation. Janet said that was premature. Dale said it was decided. Janet sat back and crossed her arms. Dale moved on to the tow authorization policy proposal. He said the board had reviewed a draft requiring 2 officer signatures and photographic evidence before any tow could be ordered. Brenda said she supported it. The 3rd board member, a quiet guy named Ed, said he also supported it. Janet said it was unnecessary bureaucracy. Dale said the motion carried 3-1. Janet said she was filing a formal objection. Dale said noted. After the meeting, I stood in the parking lot talking to Phil and Marcus. Phil said that was the most entertaining board meeting he had ever attended. Marcus said the spreadsheet had been a brilliant move. I said I wished it had not been necessary. A woman walked up and introduced herself as Claire. She said she was a reporter for the local neighborhood blog, and she had been covering HOA disputes for 2 years. She said she had heard about my case and wanted to do a story. I said I was not looking for publicity. She said publicity was sometimes the best way to force accountability. I said I would think about it. She handed me her card and said to call her if I changed my mind. The next day I got an email from Linda saying my amenities access had been restored. I tested my card at the gym and it worked. I felt a small sense of relief. I went home and checked my mailbox. There was another certified letter from the HOA. I opened it and my stomach dropped. It was a notice of intent to file a lien on my property for unpaid fines and fees totaling $3,200. The list included the original $50 fine that had been refunded, the tow fees that had been waived, a series of new fines for guest parking violations I had never been notified about, and something called an administrative fee for dispute processing. I read the list 3 times. Every single item was either fabricated or already resolved. I called Marcus immediately. He said it was a bluff and possibly extortion. He said HOA liens required proper notice and a hearing, and Janet was trying to intimidate me into dropping my complaint. I said it was working. He said do not let it. He said file a response disputing every item on the list and attach all your evidence. He said also file a complaint with the State Attorney General for harassment and fraudulent billing. I said I was exhausted. He said I know, but if you back down now, she wins. I said I would do it. I spent the next 3 days drafting a 10-page response to the lien notice. I attached the doorbell video, the forged tow authorization, the signature comparison, the spreadsheet of selective enforcement, copies of all my dispute emails, and the board meeting minutes showing the fees had been refunded. I sent the packet to Linda, the entire board, and the association attorney. I also filed a formal complaint with the Washington State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. I attached the same evidence packet and wrote a cover letter explaining the pattern of harassment, fabricated violations, and fraudulent billing. I requested an investigation and asked the state to intervene. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the association attorney. He introduced himself as Richard and said he had reviewed my complaint and the evidence. He said the board had asked him to mediate a resolution. I said I was open to mediation if it meant the harassment stopped. He said he had spoken with Janet and she was also open to mediation. I said that was surprising. He said the state complaint had gotten everyone's attention. He said the Attorney General's office had sent a preliminary inquiry letter and the board wanted to resolve the matter quickly. He asked if I would be willing to attend a mediation session with Janet, Dale, and himself. I said yes. The mediation was scheduled for the following Saturday at a neutral office space downtown. I arrived with Marcus. Richard was already there with Dale and Janet. Janet looked tense and refused to make eye contact. Richard started by laying out the issues. He said I was alleging harassment, selective enforcement, fabricated violations, and fraudulent billing. He said Janet was alleging that I was a repeat violator who refused to follow HOA rules. Richard asked me to present my evidence first. I opened my binder and walked through the doorbell video, the forged signature, the selective enforcement spreadsheet, and the timeline of escalating retaliation. I spoke for 20 minutes. Janet did not interrupt. When I finished, Richard asked Janet to respond. She said I was twisting the facts and the board had legitimate enforcement authority. She said I had been cited multiple times and refused to comply. I said every citation had been fabricated or resolved. Richard asked Janet to provide documentation supporting her claims. She pulled out a folder and handed him a stack of notices. Richard flipped through them. He asked Janet why the decal citation was issued when my decal was visible. She said it was on the wrong side. He asked why 6 other homes with the same issue had not been cited. She said she had not noticed them. He asked why my plate was marked inactive in the system. She said it was an administrative error. He asked who made the error. She said she did not know. Richard set the notices down and said it appeared there was a pattern of selective enforcement and retaliatory actions. He said the lien notice was particularly concerning because most of the items listed had already been resolved. Janet said the lien was based on the ledger. Richard asked to see the ledger. She said she did not have it with her. Richard said we could reconvene when she brought the ledger. Janet said that was not necessary. Richard said then we needed to come to a resolution today. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted all fabricated fees removed from my account. a formal written apology from Janet, the lien notice withdrawn, and Janet to recuse herself from any future enforcement actions involving my property. I also said I wanted a refund of fees that hits the ledger like a slap. Janet said she would not apologize. Dale said, "Janet, we need to resolve this." She said I was making a mountain out of a molehill. Richard said the state complaint made it a mountain regardless. He said the Attorney General's office could impose fines and oversight if they found violations. He said it was in everyone's interest to settle. Dale asked me if I would accept a settlement without a personal apology from Janet. I said I would accept a formal board resolution acknowledging the errors and committing to policy changes. Richard said that was reasonable. Dale said he could draft that. Janet said she objected. Dale said noted. Richard said he would draft a settlement agreement outlining the terms. He said the board would remove all disputed fees from my account, withdraw the lien notice, and issue a formal resolution acknowledging procedural errors and committing to the new two-signature tow policy. He said Janet would recuse herself from enforcement actions involving my property for 1 year. He said in exchange I would withdraw my state complaint. I said I wanted the refund processed immediately. Richard said he would include that. Janet said she wanted me to sign a non-disparagement clause. I said no. Richard said non-disparagement clauses were standard. I said I reserved the right to tell my story if asked. Richard said we could limit it to no proactive media outreach. I said fine. The settlement was drafted and signed 2 days later. I received a check for $640 covering the original $50 fine, the fabricated guest parking fines, and the bogus administrative fee. The lien notice was withdrawn. The board passed a resolution stating that procedural errors had occurred in my case, and the board was committed to fair and consistent enforcement going forward. Janet did not attend the vote. The resolution passed 4-0 with 1 abstention. I deposited the check and felt like I could breathe again. A month later, Janet resigned from the board. The official reason was personal commitments. Phil told me he had heard she was facing pressure from other homeowners who had started comparing notes and realized she had been playing favorites for years. Claire, the reporter, published a story on her blog titled "Eagle Ridge HOA Faces Reckoning After Selective Enforcement Scandal." The story included interviews with 3 other homeowners who had been targeted by Janet. One of them had been threatened with a lien for a mailbox color violation. Another had been cited for a guest vehicle that was actually his wife's car. The third had been locked out of amenities for 6 months over a disputed landscaping fine. The story got picked up by a local news station. The station ran a segment on HOA abuses. Eagle Ridge was featured prominently. The board held a special election to fill Janet's seat. A younger guy named Tom won. He was a software engineer who had moved in 2 years earlier and had kept a low profile. At his first meeting, Tom proposed a transparency initiative requiring the board to publish monthly enforcement reports showing all violations issued, broken down by type and address. The motion passed unanimously. He also proposed a formal appeals process with a neutral third-party mediator for disputed fines over $100. That passed too. The HOA was changing. I ran into Janet once more about 2 months after she resigned. I was getting coffee at the neighborhood cafe and she was in line behind me. She did not say anything. I paid for my coffee and turned to leave. She said my name. I stopped. She said, "You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee." I stared at her. She smiled and walked past me to the counter. I stood there for a moment trying to process what had just happened. Then I remembered. That was her boomerang line. She had said it during the first tow confrontation. I pulled out my phone and opened my voice memo app. I played the recording from that day. Her voice came through the speaker, clear and loud. "You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee." The barista looked over. Janet turned red. I said I kept everything documented. She walked out without ordering. The following week I got a call from Tom, the new board member. He said the board had received complaints from 3 other homeowners claiming Janet had retaliated against them during her tenure. He said the board was conducting an audit of all enforcement actions from the past 2 years. He asked if I would be willing to share my documentation. I said absolutely. I sent him my entire evidence file. 2 weeks later, Tom called again. He said the audit had uncovered a pattern of selective enforcement targeting specific homeowners while ignoring violations at properties owned by Janet's friends. He said the board was referring the findings to the management company and considering additional policy reforms. He thanked me for standing up. I said I just wanted fair treatment. A month later, the board held a town hall meeting to discuss the audit findings. The meeting room was packed. Tom presented a summary of the audit. He said the board had identified 42 enforcement actions over 2 years that appeared to be retaliatory or selectively applied. He said the board was refunding all associated fees and issuing formal apologies to the affected homeowners. He said the board was also implementing a new oversight committee to review all enforcement actions before they were finalized. The room erupted in applause. Phil caught my eye from across the room and gave me a thumbs up. After the meeting, a woman I did not recognize came up to me and shook my hand. She said her name was Maria, and she had been cited by Janet for a landscaping violation 2 years ago. She said she had paid the fine because she was scared of retaliation. She said seeing me fight back had inspired her to file an appeal. The board had refunded her fine last week. She thanked me. I said I was glad I could help. She said the neighborhood felt different now. I said I agreed. The final piece of the story happened 3 months later. I was working late one night and got an email notification. It was from the Washington State Attorney General's office. The email said their investigation into the Eagle Ridge Property Owners Association had been closed after the board implemented corrective measures including policy reforms, refunds, and an oversight committee. The email said my complaint had been instrumental in prompting the investigation. The email also said the HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints pile up. I smiled and forwarded the email to Marcus. He replied saying we should celebrate. I said I would buy him that beer I owed Phil. That weekend, I invited Marcus and Phil over for a backyard cookout. We sat on my patio talking and laughing. Phil told a story about Janet showing up at his door once to complain about his lawn, and he had turned the sprinklers on mid-conversation. Marcus told a story about a client who had fought an HOA over a fence color and won after proving the board president owned stock in the fence company. I told them about Karen claims she never came by and the doorbell video plays. We laughed until our sides hurt. It felt good to laugh. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The board published monthly enforcement reports. The oversight committee reviewed every violation before it was finalized. Complaints dropped. Property values stayed stable. People stopped being afraid of arbitrary citations. I kept my documentation habit, but I did not need it anymore. The rules were still there, but they were applied fairly. That was all I had ever wanted. Janet moved out of Eagle Ridge 6 months later. I heard she sold her house and relocated to a different development across town. I did not see her again. Tom told me the new owners were a young couple with a toddler. They seemed nice. The neighborhood kept improving. The board approved funds for a playground renovation. The pool got a new heater. The clubhouse got fresh paint. Eagle Ridge felt like a community again. I kept working as a notary public, documenting transactions and keeping everything organized. The habit that had saved me during the HOA war became part of my daily routine. I filed every receipt, every contract, every notice. I scanned everything into digital backups. I kept my records clean. It gave me peace of mind. I knew that if anyone ever tried to fabricate a story about me again, I would have the evidence to fight back. But I also hoped I would never need it. One afternoon, I was sitting on my patio when Phil walked over with 2 beers. He handed me one and sat down. He said he had been thinking about the whole Janet saga. He said it was crazy how one person with a little authority could make life miserable for so many people. I said it was also crazy how much power a single doorbell camera could have. He laughed and clinked his beer against mine. He said he was glad I had not given up. I said I was glad he had installed that camera. We sat there in the afternoon sun, the harsh afternoon sun with sharp shadows across parking lines long behind us, and enjoyed the quiet. "I appreciate you being here,"